What happens when Joe finds out? Since it was Friday and I had just taken my Volvo in for service, I decided that the serviceman would drive me home instead of to the office. On the way, he would drive it back. It was a warm, late spring day, and there was some yard work waiting for me at home, which was the reason for my decision. We have a big backyard, and I was on the back property line raking leaves when I saw my brother's red Corvette pull into our driveway. Great, I thought. The only time he comes here is to borrow something, which he rarely returns. As I approached the driveway, I heard my son Sam call out to me, "Hey, Dad, what brings you to the land of wimps?" Dad? Why did my son call my brother Dad? And why is this the land of wimps? My brother replied, "I'm returning Uncle Joe's circular saw. I accidentally cut the electrical cord. He has to fix it so I can finish my project at home. Is there a clueless Joe here?" Clueless Joe? My name is Joe, and I hardly consider myself ignorant. Maybe I am? Maybe I should stay outside the garage and listen to this insulting conversation. Sure enough, I turned on my cell phone to record the conversation. Sam was saying, "Clueless Car isn't here. He rarely gets home before 5, and I try not to spend much time with him. So no, I don't think he's home. Say, when school is over, when can I spend time at your house? It's a lot more fun there than it is here. I'd love to have you come visit, but your mom wants to spend as much time with you as possible. You're her only child, and she'll be lonely when you leave. Give her some slack. She should spend some time with me Thursday afternoon, and I can ask her about having you stay with me for a week or two this summer." I hated to hear my son ask, "Why doesn't Mom divorce Clueless and move in with you?" I didn't realize she regularly spent her days at his house. Oh no. Things were starting to add up that I didn't like at all. Could it be that I was ignorant? Thoughts of what was going on were weighing on me. Eric bragged, "Ever since she got pregnant with you, I've been asking her about it monthly. She says, 'No, you're great, but you'd be a lousy husband.' I have a husband that I love and cherish very much. Every moment with him makes me feel like I am the luckiest woman in the world. I love him, and I certainly don't love you." That's why, son, she won't divorce Joe Tyndall, but she will have fun with Eric Tyndall from time to time. I have to go now, but I'll see you tomorrow at noon at your grandparents' house for the annual family birthday party and Memorial Day luncheon. At that moment, my legs turned into spaghetti, and I slid down the garage wall into my hosta garden. My world was shattered. The fact that my son was not my biological son was blown out of proportion. My wife getting pregnant by my brother and then having regular fun with him was overwhelming. Somehow I got back to my place of employment and sat on a rope swing. A swing on which I spent many hours pushing my son to his delight. I sat on that swing and cried until a huge puddle of mud formed at my feet. What was I supposed to do? Before I did anything, I had to assess the whole situation. And then I remembered my redemption, a DNA test. A few years ago, Carol, Sam, and I had taken the 23andMe DNA test. How could that be wrong? But what if Carol threw away my test and put Eric's saliva in a test tube with my name on it? That would hide Sam's real origin. What a despicable thing to do. They threw away my heritage and replaced it with this jerk's, purposefully denying me the right to know that I was not the father of the boy I so desperately loved. With the thought of redemption put to rest, I needed to take stock of my current world. My name is Joe Tyndall, and I am 43 years old. I don't weigh much more now than I did in college, 175 pounds. I am slender and was not a jock in high school or college. My specialty was running, and I excelled on our high school track team. Now the distance running I enjoyed is interrupted by family and work obligations. But I still wind up a few miles each week, sometimes participating in charity 5K or 10K runs. The job for me is the dual role of finance and operations director at Tyndall's Machine Company in my hometown. My great-grandfather started out as a blacksmith, sharpening plowshares and putting iron rings on wooden wagon wheels. Grandfather Tyndall and my father Edward followed suit, each adding the latest metalworking equipment of their day to the business. We now manufacture precision aerospace parts and metal spare parts. My father, Edward, is president, and my brother, Eric, is director of marketing for a 50-person company. My father did not go to college, but attended the best trade school available at the time. I have bachelor's degrees in industrial engineering and accounting, so I am the CFO and COO. Younger brother Eric was the complete opposite of me in his physical build. At 6'3", he was 5 inches taller than me and 50 pounds heavier. He was the consummate athlete, big, loud, arrogant, and a real bully. In high school soccer, he was a crowd favorite. A small college scholarship paid for his tuition while I had to work and take out loans. He only graduated from college because the instructors were constantly passing credits so he could play soccer. Eric's degree in physical education was of no use to him or other employers, so he started working at Tyndall as a junior mechanic. Most of our work requires precision, and that was not his thing. Instead, he used his name to open doors for new and existing customers. He couldn't discuss the intricacies of our business, but he had a great ability to bully to keep customers happy. Don't get me wrong, he was good at what he did and brought value to the company. As with any multi-generational company, we had our disagreements. For example, Eric wanted a commission on new sales. It wasn't outside the industry, but he was already making a good salary, and so was I. I used this moment to ask him to keep all the income from the patents I had registered. Edward conceded easily to Eric, but I had to seriously fight him to get the money I had earned. My wife Carol met me because of my beauty. I graduated from college and worked with my father. I saw many women during and after college, but this one was special. Carol had a high school diploma and was working as an English teacher. A year after we met while jogging, we were married in Carol's home church. After 2 happy years of married life, we decided to start our own family. Despite repeated nights and weekends out, Carol could not get pregnant. Our whole lives were focused on getting her pregnant. Neither of us wanted to take a fertility test at this time. Maybe in a year or so, but not now. I was heartbroken as I wanted to have at least 2 children, regardless of their gender. We both relaxed. Just a couple months later, Carol got her period, but she didn't want to jinx it by telling anyone, including me. Pregnancy was not without its challenges. For the last 2 months, Carol was bedridden by doctor's orders. The labor was difficult, and we nearly lost both my wife and our newborn son that day. Sam, which is what we named our baby, was an energetic boy, constantly active. To Carol's dismay, he and I loved to scuffle on the floor. The hours of throwing, kicking, and shooting a ball were countless. His grades were not exceptional, but were slightly higher than the average boy his age. After his 15th birthday, the relationship between us began to deteriorate. I attributed it to the usual conflict between parents and children at that age. We used to chat for hours over a ball, but he said he was busy now. Too busy with his cell phone and Game Boy to talk to his dad. When push came to shove, he became sullen and disrespectful. As I understood it, he thought being an accountant was less manly than other professions. Probably part of the reason for this thought was that he had become taller and more muscular than I was. Over the years, Carol remained the perfect wife in every way. Her knowledge, intelligence, and total dedication to her vocation made her the principal of McKinley School. A school that was designed to give special attention to students who had difficulty putting effort into their schoolwork and who had trouble interacting with others, that is, fighting. I noticed that this stress of supervising unruly students was leading to conflicts at home. She would make barbed remarks about what I did or did not do according to her definition of a task. Her irritation with me rarely extended to bedtime. She was always sweet and loving when we lay under the covers. There was no part of our lives that I found unacceptable or not frequent enough. So I was dumbfounded when I heard my brother tell Sam that he was Sam's father and had been having regular fun with Carol for over 17 years. No way, I thought to myself. But what did I really know for sure? My biggest doubt was that Sam had the same build as Eric and Edward. I'm the odd man out when it comes to genetic similarities. Something was wrong, either in my head or in my stomach, as I pondered the possibilities. That evening, I watched Carol like a hawk watches a mouse. There were absolutely no obvious signs that she was having an affair. Dinner was lively and pleasant. Sam left to pick up some friends in his car to watch a movie or whatever they were doing before 11 p.m. Since Sam was gone until 11 p.m., Carol and I got busy cleaning up the kitchen. She asked me to load the dishwasher while she went to the bathroom. When I turned around, she was wearing only a lace apron. She pretended like nothing strange had happened and told me, "Hurry up! Get to work, for I have plans for you today." We laughed and played. Then we went to bed where we got busy. The next morning, Saturday, we were to go to my parents' house for lunch in honor of Edward's 70th birthday. Carol didn't like driving in my Volvo, and Sam wanted to go alone so he could leave early. We did what Carol wanted. We all drove in her Lexus. When we walked in the front door, my mom, Sally, started hugging us in order. Carol, Sam, then me. The same order was for Edward. Next, I watched the interaction between Eric and Carol. Eric happily hugged Sam, then held out his arms for a hug from Carol. The hug was enthusiastic on Eric's part, but lifeless on Carol's part. In fact, I thought I saw a look of boredom and annoyance on her face. It was a reaction I had not expected from lovers who had been having fun for 17 years. During a lull in conversation, I cast the first line. "Eric, I need to talk to our financial controller on Thursday afternoon. Will you be in the office to fill in for me?" I said this knowing that he didn't know anything about accounting processes and wouldn't help anyone who called me. "No, Joe, I won't be in the office either. Big project in the works." Carol blew her nose a couple bubbles in her iced tea. That means I'm getting close to finding out something. "Well, big guy, is it something that makes you sweat and exhausted?" "No, I've worked with this man many times and always come out a winner." Carol's gaze was hotter than any of our plasma cutters. I could see the color drain from her face. No one made any sound. No fork hitting the plate or the clinking of ice in the tea. Midnight in the cemetery was simply deafening compared to Mom's dining room. The eyes of the five of them were spinning. That, too, was a sign that they were all aware of the infidelity. I thought I could hear the sweat trickling down their skin. This was exactly what I wanted. To be an ignorant Joe to these five, but underneath that clumsiness, I knew what was going on. Dad melted the ice by saying, "Well, guys, get out your calendars to see who's going where." He continued, "I'm glad you're here today for my birthday. My grandfather bought this 160-acre tract when it was a few miles out of town. He would be proud that the land is still in the family, and our family business is growing under Eric and Joe's leadership. As a result of my trust in you boys and my advanced age, I am going to step down as president of Tyndall's. Eric will be the new president. There will be a change in the salary structure. Joe's new salary will be 75% of Eric's salary. I really want Joe to stay with the company and be rewarded for his good work. With Joe's income from the patents, you'll both have about the same income." Carol squeezed my hand and smiled warmly. "So I'll report directly to Eric?" Eric, who doesn't know the difference between a CNC machine and a popcorn popper, will be running the company. That's a recipe for disaster of the worst kind. "Look, bro, I've always been the in-charge guy, and you're the head small bean salesman. It takes an alpha male to be the boss, not a wimp like you. Deal with it, Joe. Once again, I win, you lose." "That's enough, boys. Eric, you're not going to be the boss. I'm still chairman of the board and I outrank you. I own all the stock. You will run the business the way I tell you to. This company's been in the family for over 100 years, and I'm not going to let it fall apart on my watch. We're Tyndall's, and an important family legacy is as much in our hands as the people on the wall. So cool it." Dad pointed to the pictures of 3 generations of Tyndalls on the living room wall for empty effect. "By the way, Dad, which picture on the wall is your grandfather in?" "My grandfather is on the left side of the picture. My father is next to him and I'm on the far end." "I thought you knew that." "I just confirmed it because I have a question. If you look at the 3 pictures, I don't seem to resemble any Tyndall, living or dead. Not in build, hair color, or facial expression. Eric and Sam look like Tyndall, but not me. I don't understand that. My mother's shoulders clenched. Her face turned gray at the same rate Dad's turned red. Silence reigned again, as looks wavered between my parents and Eric. I found that the best way to get people to open up is to drop a turd in their lap, and then be quiet and let them carefully clean it up without getting their hands dirty. Joe, you may finally know a family secret. Your mom and I were planning to get married, and your mom got drunk at a bachelorette party and got pregnant. She thought she was pregnant with me. She couldn't have known. We were married before she even knew she was pregnant. We were both surprised but happy because I thought I was the father. You were a weak and stunted child. We thought it was because of your mother's pregnancy problems. You were a sickly baby and we almost lost you when you got mumps. Within a few weeks, we were on the brink of death. Joe, you were about 10 years old before we realized you weren't my biological son. Sally hid the fact that she had something with another man before our marriage. She said you looked a lot like that guy. When DNA tests became available, we had you tested and confirmed that you are not my biological son, but Eric. Well, that answered some questions about how I was treated in comparison to Eric. It wasn't the bombshell I was expecting. I was trying to figure out Sam's biological father, and here I was getting this shoved in my face. Everything turned upside down. There wasn't much I could do about it, but now I had even more questions. Mom finally spoke up. That doesn't mean we don't love you as much as Eric. We raised you as our son, and we both still consider you our son. That was nice to hear from her, but what did that have to do with what I was hearing from Sam and Eric? Okay, Dad, that explains my body type. Why doesn't Sam have my body type and not like you and Eric? Here comes another shit for them. Joe, you and Carol tried so hard to have a baby that it became stressful for Carol. She thought she couldn't handle you and came to ask your mother for advice. She remembered that you had a severe case of mumps and had probably become infertile. Your mother and I came to the conclusion that for the sake of your marriage and the Tyndall's inheritance, we needed Eric to impregnate Carol. Carol objected at first, but then realized that everyone in the family would benefit from having a new Tyndall's child. That included you, Joe. You wanted a family, and Eric and Carol gave you what you couldn't produce. We hoped it wouldn't be discovered. But thanks to DNA tests and the genetic differences between Tyndall and non-Tyndall physiques, it would inevitably come to the surface. My mind was overwhelmed by a blizzard of emotions. Emotions swirled around in my head like a tornado. There are no words. I could not make sense of this momentous discovery. Both my mother and wife surrounded me, hugging me lovingly and tenderly. Both had tears in their eyes. They knew the pain and confusion I was experiencing. The mother whispered, my son, I am so proud of you. Carol whispered, my husband, I love you so much. Father said, we hoped, Joe, that you wouldn't take offense at this, but would enjoy the love your family has for you. Geez, Edward, can I call you Edward since I know you're not my father? What makes you think I wouldn't mind being humiliated by my entire family? Sam snorted. Now you know how humiliated I was. When the kids think you're my father and not a real man like Eric. Jez. Everyone turned their eyes to the insolent Sam. Carol, slapping him across the face, exclaimed, Joe was the best father in the world to you. He spared nothing to make you happy. I've seen 1,000 kids who had a worse father than him, but none were better than him. You should count your lucky stars that he raised you. I said sarcastically, why did it take you so long to inform me of such a generous concern for my feelings? Why not pull the scab off the wound right away instead of lying to me all these years? I bet you laughed merrily behind my back when I bragged about what a wonderful son I had. Instead, you nicknamed me Misunderstood Joe. Once again, the center of the universe is silent. We couldn't tell you that, Joe. It would have been too painful for you, and we hoped no one would find out. Besides, we needed you at the plant. You're the brains and ingenuity of the whole operation. We'd be lost if you got upset and left. Besides, we couldn't afford to pay someone as good as you. We asked the recruiter to give us a salary range for the CFO and COO, and he said they were more than double what we're paying you. That's too much for me to comprehend. You pushed my brother to conceive my wife for Tyndall's child, not mine. You forced me to work for lower wages just to keep your profits and dividends higher. You make me think I'll run the show one day, but Tyndall blood is more important than competence. I can't believe what you dumped on me today. Next thing you know, you'll be telling me that my precious wife is still having fun with that asshole brother of mine. Here it is, the great revelation. Whether or not she'll tell me she's still having fun with Eric. Maybe she'll just lie, like she's been doing for the last 17 years. The room was silent again. Glances wavered between the co-conspirators, but no one denied the mortal sin. Finally, a meek voice moaned, "I'm sorry, Joe. I'm sorry, but you have to understand the strain and stress I'm under at work. I don't love him. I hate him for what he is and who he is. However, I need him to keep me from going crazy." With those words, she collapsed to the floor. My left foot took a step towards her to comfort her, but the rest of my body said, "Stop!" She brought this on herself. Now she would have to deal with the consequences. "I'm sorry, son, but we—" Son? Son? You're a bloody hypocrite. Calling me son after you ruined my entire existence. Giving me minimal affection compared to Eric while we were children. Encouraging my wife to cuckoldry by passing off Eric's bastard child as your own. And all the while laughing at my complete ignorance regarding your utter and complete disrespect for me. I'm done with this snake's lair. By saying you were doing it for me, you were deliberately and literally mocking me for your own personal reasons. None of those reasons were for my benefit. They were all heartbreaking to me. I'm like a newborn orphan, an abandoned child with absolutely no one to come to my aid. A personal and heartfelt screw you to each and every one of you vile bastards. Shouting this tirade so loud that my mouth was watering, I turned to leave. Just as I reached the door, a large paw grabbed my arm. "I'm really sorry about this, Joe. Since it means so much to you, I'm going to stop entertaining your wife, so I'm returning it to you." What chutzpah on the part of this consummate asshole, giving my tormented wife back to me. I turned toward the door again, but this time Eric spun me around. The spinning proved unexpectedly useful to me, as I had the opportunity to strike him stealthily as I turned. Carol and Sam rushed toward him, but with different emotions. Sam was trying to calm his mother's breeder. Sam turned to me and screamed, "You bastard! You bloody bastard!" Ha, what hypocrisy! One bastard calling another bastard a bastard. What a damn sewer you've got here, Ed and Sally. A bloody mess. Carol started kicking Eric in the back as hard as she could, yelling, "You asshole deserves this and 1,000 others." I left the mini riot, got into Carol's car, and started backing out, crashing into the driver's side of Eric's precious Corvette. As I drove out of the yard, I hit the passenger side of Edward's new F-150 pickup truck. From the agony and humiliation, it was all I could do to keep the car on the road. An abandoned gas station gave me a respite from the experience. At first I cried until I thought I was dehydrating myself. Then anger erupted like 4th of July fireworks. Punching the vinyl dashboard was the most I was capable of in that state. Finally, fatigue took over. My limbs weakened and my mind went numb. The buzzing of a cell phone came from the floor. It was one of the many calls and texts the whore, my ex-wife Carol, was trying to send. Taking a deep breath, I thought, what am I going to do now? There was no way they could undo what they had done. I was not only a cuckold, but a true bastard, as my mother was not married to my biological father. Well, isn't that the real shitstorm I found myself in? 3 days ago, I was king of the world. Now it's a world of shit. The only good thing I could think of was that I had a choice. I could continue to be ignorant Joe and I'd get a raise, but I'd have to report to Eric or Edward as my boss. Every day I would see Eric and Carol causing the same pain in my gut that I had today. It wasn't going to happen since they both ruined my life. The first option was no good. The second option was to just quietly sneak out of town. Let things continue like this in the Tyndall household, and let one chair at the table remain empty. It was an idea, but they wouldn't care. They didn't care about me when I was here, so why should they care when I wasn't? The second option wasn't for me, but maybe I could combine the second option with the third. The third option involved my involvement with the Snake family, but not in their favor. To make them regret every cheating, lying, stealing, and humiliation they had done to me. Yeah, I like Doctor Number 3. The only thing holding me back right now was that I was 20 miles from my house and I needed to move on. The damaged car the hookers had left in the yard, not in the driveway. My computer and all important papers were boxed up and loaded into my Volvo. Clothes that I would need for the next few months were put in the car. All other clothes and things I wanted to keep but didn't need right now were put in Sam's 2017 Acura. Sam's dog Bullet wouldn't leave me alone when I tried to escape. He would make noises like he wanted to go outside. He was always a pain in my butt, and I would be glad to be rid of cleaning up poop, feeding, and walking a dog who never loved me. Bullet did me a very nice parting favor by pooping next to the house. Chuckling, I picked up the steaming excrement and carried it into the bedroom. On our marital bed was a quilt my mother and grandmother had made for us. It was called the engagement ring quilt because most of the squares had wedding ring prints on them. Other squares were made from clothes that Carol and I wore as children. Our names and wedding date were sewn into the squares. It was a memory box made of fabric. The perfect place for a steaming dog turd to take a place of honor in this house. The final ingredient was my wedding ring, laying on top of the dog turd. No doubt Carol would recognize the symbolism. All the wall pictures of the whore and Eric's son were stacked on her cherry wood dining table. Covering the pictures with a towel to protect myself, I picked up the hammer. I drove my largest nail from the store into the entire stack, sending glass flying in all directions. Now I was ready to move on. Nothing and no one made me feel like I should be here. My loaded Volvo drove me to an extended stay hotel on the other side of town. After unloading the car, I drove to the airport, put the Volvo in the long-term parking lot, and rented a Hertz car. My plan was to keep the snakes from finding and chasing me. The rental car took me to my new base of operations. An Uber driver drove me to pick up Sam's car so I could put it in storage. When I was relocated, I would unload the car and sell it. After all, it was titled in my name since Sam couldn't be insured after speeding tickets. A dinner of pizza and beer delivered to my room allowed me to stay out of anyone's sight. I didn't want to leave the house as I had projects that needed to be completed. Projects that involved moving personal funds so that no one but me could handle them. The joint credit cards were paid off and closed. I left her the amount of her last 2 paychecks in a joint account and took the rest for myself. Sam will have to study harder since I embezzled the entire college fund I was saving for him by withdrawing money each month. He will have to ask his real father for that money. Hey. It took a bit of a head trip to fall asleep that night. I kept remembering good things about my family and wanted to bring them back. My sanity told me that the people I loved didn't care about me. Why should I care about them? After this reboot, I became not so much Clumsy Joe, but Scary Joe. Tomorrow, Scary Joe will be going to the Tyndall manufactory. It will be Sunday, and no one will be in the office. Oh, what a fun day I could have. The funny thing is that it made me sleep better. My rental car and I parked a reasonable distance from the entrance to Tyndall Manufacturing. I could have parked in my spot, but then someone would have thought I was there. After disabling the security alarm and then rearming it, I went to my office. Since I was the CFO, I had access to all the money accounts. Tyndall had 7 different accounts, so I transferred all the money into one main one, leaving enough for 2 employee paychecks. The line of credit at the bank was exhausted and added to the general account. I transferred all the funds to our international account in the Caymans. It was still company money. I wasn't about to be charged with any crime other than cuckoldry. This Cayman account had been set up years ago because we used it as a clearinghouse, buying and selling goods to European companies. Now the fun part begins. I have changed the username and password for each account. For some time, no one will be able to access the accounts, They won't even know where to start, since none of the banks sent monthly statements on paper or by email. Chuckling, I changed the mailing address to 101 Big Tree Street, 2. Montana, 59085. I sent emails about closing electric, gas, water, phone, and internet bills. Since the beginning of time, the people of Tyndall have always saved every scrap of paper related to business. 5 years ago, I started a program where everything was stored in the cloud. The only paper we had was vehicle and warranty paperwork. Everyone in the finance department had access to these files. I was the only one authorized to add and delete files. Passwords and logins were changed, so no one could even peek at the accounts. All the CNC machines that were networked had a new password and login. Eric's office was my next place to try to get something juicy out of his computer. It didn't take me long to find a few video files. He was entertaining the staff, the wives of the locals, and of course Carol. I burned the videos to my flash drive and left his computer undamaged. I wanted to save that retribution for later. The last stop was the back room, not a normal room, but a fortress. This secure room with concrete walls contained the main power line. Tyndall MFG was consuming huge amounts of electricity with all the machines humming. Touching the wrong wire at the wrong time could turn a man to ash in a nanosecond. The electrician and I were the only ones allowed in. The bureaucracy of the electric company would take days to shut off our service. In the meantime, I disconnected everything from the safe room and then installed new locks. By the time they realize it was the main transformer box that tripped the breakers, the electric company will have turned off the lights. You'll have to work hard to open that heavy door. The keys to this room, and all the other keys to rooms, closets, warehouses, trucks, offices, and machines were thrown into a bucket of cleaning fluid that would wash away all traces of where the key had been. It was sad to leave the building I grew up in and wanted to make it my one and only place to work. Becoming president with Sam standing behind me running the place was one of my dreams. Those dreams turned into nightmares, like most of my other dreams. During my tenure at Tyndall, I attended most of the industry conventions. I went to meetings and breakout sessions. Eric took his buddies to drinking parties and strip clubs. Now this became my new hunting ground for jobs. There was no need to open any of the voluminous messages, phone calls, or emails my formerly wonderful family sent. The words were simply repetitive. We love you. We're sorry you're upset, but we did what we did for you, not against you. Not to hurt your feelings. Please sit down with us or your wife so we can explain things better. My mother begged that Edward forgive her for getting me pregnant, and they stayed married. Why can't I do the same with Carol and Sam? The number 17 flashed through my brain. Because Carol had fun with him for 17 years, and your son's mother was just a one-night stand whore. Tuesday morning, I called my attorney, Bob Carson, to represent me and discuss my options. He had some free time at 3 p.m., so I went back to my apartment and gathered the documents I thought he would need. I would prefer to file for divorce for adultery, but that would require me to move the bitch to another state. I doubted she would agree to that. I told him the consequences of her infidelity, and told him I didn't want to pay alimony. I agree to everything being split 50-50. I do not own any shares in Tyndall MFG. All I had was a salary and some income from patents. It was to my advantage that Tyndall MFG imposed a substandard salary on me, a salary that I thought would one day lead to the presidency and stock ownership. Carol's salary as a school principal was very close to mine, so the attorney decided that the case should be open and shut easily unless she resisted. The plan was to get the paperwork drawn up and filed in court as soon as possible, preferably at her school. After all, she had humiliated me for years. It was time to share the shame. While at the attorney's office, I informed him of the reallocation of Tyndall funds. Since I was the CFO, the company gave me permission to move money between banks. I did not take a dime from the accounts. The money still belonged to Tyndall MFG. They would just have to work hard to get their hands on it. He thought my actions were unwise. Joe, If Tyndall suffers any monetary loss as a result of this reshuffle, as you call it, they can sue you. They can sue you and probably win it. And what would they get? What kind of assets do I have for them to spend a huge amount of money on revenge? Besides, they won't like it if I have to explain in court, under oath, to the good people of our town why I did what I did. No, sir, they don't want this Pandora's box open to the public. He shook his head and informed me that he needed a check for $3,000. From my list of manufacturers I had met with and wanted to work for, it didn't take long before I had 3 meetings. These companies wanted both my services and access to my patents. There was absolutely no reason to stay in town. I had many friends I could count on for help, but I didn't want to burden them. There was only one way to get out of this vat of crap: work my way up and pop up in a new place. Start over at 43 years old. A week later, Bob Carson called to say he'd just gotten back from the DA's office. Edward was yelling and demanding that I be arrested for embezzlement, fraud, and grand larceny. Bob told the DA and Edward that all the funds were in a Tyndall account that had been active for years. All the money still belongs to the company. Nothing has been withdrawn from it. Edward just has to arrange for a new person to be in the account. Of course, I knew the old asshole would have to fly to the Cayman Islands to do that. And he absolutely hates flying, especially over water. A month after Carol got the divorce papers, my lawyer called and asked if I had returned her phone calls. I laughed at such a silly question. Of course, I had not answered her call, text, email, postal mail, or smoke signal. 2 legal issues stood in the way of finalizing the divorce. Carol objected to my taking the college fund in Sam's car. Even my attorney thought it would be difficult to get it through a judge. I replied that I would let them take half of those funds. If that wasn't enough, I would sue for fraud because I was led to believe I was his father and had paid all of his expenses for the past 16 years. I would sue Carol, Eric, Sally, and Edward. I might not win the case, but the media would have a great time watching Tyndall's dirty laundry come out on social media. A week later, the lawyer called and said Carol was willing to sign the papers as presented if I would spend 1 hour with her. Presumably, she wanted to justify herself, or maybe just explain the horrible things she had done to me. Either way, I didn't want to see or talk to her again. However, the new clean slate I was creating required the termination of any legal ties to her and anyone named Tyndall. On the condition that only Carol and I attend the meeting, I agreed. I also wanted to have a videotape of the entire meeting to make sure I wasn't trapped. It sounds silly, but after what I had uncomplainingly endured for the past 17 years, I didn't want to take any chances. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon the following week, I drove the rental car into my former driveway. Seeing no other suspicious cars that might contain people I didn't want to see, I walked to the front door. She must have been watching me because the door opened like magic. Between us lay 2 stacks of papers that were supposed to legally destroy our marriage. Romantically speaking, the marriage was already destroyed. As with taking shit, paperwork was the last thing to do. She offered me a drink, but I abruptly declined, saying I purposely didn't ask how she was doing because I didn't care anymore. And why would I? Instead, I said, "Okay, I'm at your place. You can start." For the next 15 minutes, I listened to her read the Rogue Bible chapter by chapter and verse by verse. Nothing new. I tried to count the number of "I'm sorry" and "Can we work this out?" But her rhetoric bored me. She even opened a history book and quoted how Edward had forgiven my mother. With Sharpie in large letters, I wrote on her envelope, "Once is less than 17 years at 24 times a year, which equals 408 times. That wasn't that many times, Joe." "Okay, show me the math on how many times." In a small and trembling voice, she whispered, "Too many." There was no anger or rage on my face, just a lack of emotion. Seeing my lack of interest, she thought of something for me. "Do you want to ask me any questions?" Looking her straight in the eyes, I asked, "Why?" Taking a deep breath, she began, "Your father. Oh, I'm sorry. Edward really wanted the Tyndall bloodline to continue. Even when I was trying to get Sam pregnant, I still made love to you, hoping that you would be the one to get me pregnant. I really wanted to have your baby and be a family forever, but I blew it. The thought of labeling her the very slut label Edward didn't like was tempting. I'll just let her simmer in her own juice for a while. I don't agree with your disgusting conclusion, Carol. I've heard it enough times to be repulsed by the suggestion that Eric's child would create a bond in our family. So, was continuing to have fun with Eric after the pregnancy really your idea of keeping our family together? Was it really that much fun for you to continue to secretly humiliate me? No, Joe. It had nothing to do with you. Bullshit! I shouted. It had everything to do with me. I was your husband. You promised not to have fun with anyone else. What is wrong with you that you think cheating with someone else is okay? Is it okay if I don't know about it? I'm sorry, Joe. I misspoke. I meant to say it's more about me than it is about you. When I decided to get pregnant with Eric, I found out that he was never as good a lover as you. As soon as I got pregnant, I stopped seeing him. Now all my fun was centered on the man I loved because he loved me. So you went back to him later because I was too good a lover. Ridiculous. That might sound awful. Yeah, the whole damn thing with Eric sounds awful. Hurry up and tell that sad, sad story about how you had to have fun with a big bad man who didn't suit you. Please, Joe, I only have an hour for what's left of our life together to tell this story. I still love you, but I know I ruined my chance with you. I just want to convince you that what I did had absolutely nothing to do with my relationship with you. You've been wonderful to me, the best husband a woman could ever have. But I have a flaw. I'm very successful in life, and sometimes it goes to my head. I start to think I'm better, smarter, and more intelligent than my peers. I lose compassion for others and act like an arrogant bitch. And you know I do. I needed a man who would be tough on me, and Eric fit right in. Joe, that flaw manifested itself after your mother and father convinced me to get pregnant by Eric instead of you. You mean when you were bred as a farm animal? Interjected I. I suppose it was something like that, since there was no display of affection. We just got on with it and I left. To summarize, Joe, I went back to having fun with Eric because it humiliates me, and I needed to get down off my high horse and not be so smug. I used him instead of a therapist to change my superiority complex. Now looking back, I made a big mistake and I regret hurting the best man I met in my life. Someday, when all of this is behind us, I hope you'll remember those moments when we were happy together. That's a pretty far-fetched story. At least I know most of the facts, or do I? She replied quietly, Yes, you know all the facts now. Stumbling, I staggered toward the door, leaving a trail of small pieces of meat and pasta behind me. Carol's sobs made my ears pop. Apparently, she didn't like the vomit on the carpet and dress. That's too bad. My lawyer had to retype the documents because no one in court would touch them. 2 weeks later, the divorce was signed, with me keeping half of the college fund and the car money. She gets the house until bastard Sam graduates. I'm sure he was pissed. But since he didn't want me in his life anymore, me and all my money were gone too. Since I wasn't the father of that ungrateful bastard, I refused to pay child support. If required by the court, I would have changed the statement to adultery and sued all the Tyndalls for fraud. No one needed the embarrassment. I was already ashamed of being a Tyndall. During my self-imposed hibernation, I was in a quandary about watching the video files I had downloaded from Eric's office. I still hadn't come to terms with the fact that I had found out about Carol's infidelity, not to mention being collected enough to watch two people I hated having fun. Each file had a name, and I got goosebumps when I saw the name Sindra on a relatively small file. Sindra was the name of the wife of one of my best friends, John Brown. John was 2 years older than me, but we hardly ever socialized since he was a big athlete, and I was a nerd. But this nerd was chosen to help an athlete take a required English course. He excelled in science and math, but found himself stumped in English class. Over the course of the semester, we became friends until he left to attend a small college on a soccer scholarship. After college, he returned to our town to be near his aging parents. He approached me about employment, and I was pleased that he was focusing on math and engineering, which would work well in our store. On my recommendation, He was hired, and we renewed our friendship. A couple years ago, a turning point came in John and Syndra's relationship. As I understand it, Syndra was at a bachelorette party and apparently had too much to drink. In any case, she had some fun with some guy, was embarrassed, and told John about it as soon as she got home. But by then, the damage was done. They had 2 little boys by then, and divorce would have been a disaster. Syndra's file was the smallest and began with her crashing into a hotel room. I was impressed with Syndra. Now I understood why John didn't want to get rid of her. Eric was having fun with Syndra at the time. Neither of them said a word during that show. John always wanted to know what happened, but now I had some proof in case he wanted revenge. I invited John over to my apartment to discuss something very personal. After a couple beers, he asked about my top secret conversation. Without knowing John, I came across a video of your wife doing it with another guy. I think she was drunk. I can either tell you who it was or show you the video or both. Which option will hurt you the least? It took the large man some time to calm down. There were tears in his eyes, and his breathing was deep. I put my hand on his shoulder, but said nothing. "Who?" was all he said. "Brother Eric." "But she really doesn't like him. Thinks he's a real asshole. Why would she have fun with Eric?" "Like I said, John, she seemed out of it. I'll show you the video to prove she wasn't the instigator of this date." After watching the video, he recognized the nameless guy who had entertained her after a bachelorette party a few years ago. She didn't know his name or even the reason they were doing it. Telling John the story, she sobbed uncontrollably. Trying to speak calmly, he asked, "Why did he need to entertain his employee's wife like that?" She said it was a one-time thing, and he never contacted her again. My guess, John, is that he didn't know her last name. He didn't need her first name, just one thing. Standing up, he said, "Thanks, Joe. Surprisingly, that's very helpful. I'm glad I forgave her then because she was so upset and sorry. Now I know the facts, but I don't know whether to share it with Syndra or not. I'll just have to play it by ear. Can I have that video, Joe?" "Of course you can. I think it's the only copy I have." "You won't be upset if your brother suddenly has a few accidents in the next few months?" "Be nice. That would work in my favor, since I've already kicked his ass once, so I'd be under suspicion. Make sure I know the time so I have an alibi." "Thanks, Joe. You're like a brother to me." "Yeah, and you're a much better brother than I was assigned." We hugged and he said over his shoulder, "Stay in touch." I didn't spend much time rewatching the video of Carol and Eric. It just wasn't worth the time. It just ruined my mood. The time came and I just destroyed all the videos with Carol's name on them. I didn't want to see those 2 sluts again. As I was deleting the files, fate intervened and made me hit play instead of delete. It was more disgusting than I could have imagined. 2 weeks later, John stopped by my place for a beer to thank me for answering the horrible questions that had plagued him for years, and also to thank me for proving to him that Syndra had not had an affair. He had the idea of using the remaining records to destroy the cheating wives and help the husbands who had been devastated by Eric's careless actions. I gladly gave him the remaining disgusting videotapes. My cast net for my new employer was working well. One of Tyndall's main competitors contacted me and asked me to drive 100 miles to their town for an interview. It was the first flash of happiness for me in a while. Of course, I was willing to meet with them anytime, any day. Donen Corporation was led by CEO and President Tim Donen. My meeting with Tim, don't call me Mr. Donen, went very well, and I was offered a very good package of services, the same as my colleagues. There was one caveat, though. I had to meet with Reynolds' head of resources for a personality assessment. Given what I had experienced over the past few months, I was worried about what they might find wrong in my mind. The person I was to meet with the next morning at 10 o'clock was Mickey D. Reynolds, the owner of the company. Reynolds' resources did more than just do personality assessments. They also handled all the HR, recruiting, corporate governance, and reporting duties for Donen MFG. Tim said it made his job very easy, as he was the consummate engineer who loved projects more than paperwork. Their office was very modern and sophisticated, quite different from Donan's usual production office. After giving the attractive receptionist my name, I offered her coffee and a couch to sit on until Mickey D could see me. To my surprise, Mickey D actually turned out to be Mickey D, a very attractive woman, probably in her 30s. She wasn't surprised that I stammered half-heartedly as we shook hands. The firm but feminine grip seemed very pleasant to me. We spent the next couple hours discussing my personality traits, preferences, and engineering philosophy. Our conversations were polite and very pleasant. Delicately, she explained the reasons why I was leaving my inherited job at Tyndall. She knew she was not allowed to ask any personal questions, but left the door open for me to let her know anything I wanted to know. All I told her was that I was being touted for president and underpaid for the duties I was performing. "Oh my God, Joe, it's 11:45, and I bet you want to go to lunch. I'll send my report to Tim, and he'll get back to you with the details." "Would it be outside of company policy if I offered to take you to lunch? You know, sort of like a new employee's tour of the Chamber of Commerce." She smiled slyly and replied, "I'd love to." We headed out for the first of many lunches that evolved into dinners and more over the next few months. I was in no hurry to get into a relationship, but was eager to spend time with her as I really enjoyed being around her. Judging by her reaction, she seemed happy with the pace and development of the friendship. At this time, Tyndall Manufacturing was experiencing financial difficulties. Even though Tyndall had the cash to pay all the bills, there just wasn't enough money. Edward had to act quickly because suppliers and vendors needed to be paid. To keep the company afloat, he had to use his spare capital. The 160 acres of building land near the city was worth millions. Yet the thought of mortgaging the property made all the cold bones of the Tyndalls, who had owned the property for more than a century, tremble. The mortgages kept the company going until Edward traveled to the Caymans to gain control of the money. However, the reputational damage was great. Instead of allowing title to pay for materials after 14 days, the suppliers demanded cash up front. This severely damaged their working capital, and the mortgage was not repaid as the Cayman money returned to the States. Gradually, the details of the explosion in my personal and business worlds became known to Mickey D. She was sympathetic, as her world had been affected by the explosion caused by the UPS truck that had hit and killed her husband 2 years earlier. He was the founder and brain behind Reynolds Resources. She worked with him and kept the business going when he was gone. Meanwhile, John revealed that someone had attacked Eric in the parking lot of a dark bar. Working at Donan brought great happiness into my life. I settled in, and as I didn't have a non-compete clause at Tyndall, I started pirating the best customers they had. They knew I had left the company and were happy to have my contact information. I wasn't a salesman like Eric, but I knew what they needed and how to produce it better, faster, and cheaper than Tyndall. All Eric knew about our products was that you had to pay someone for them. Eric didn't get in touch with customers very often. He seemed to be constantly injured in one way or another, usually after leaving the bar. 6 months later, and after the divorce was finalized, his relationship with Mickey D was great. Besides being beautiful, loving, intelligent, and caring, she was fun to be with. After many dates and bonding, our evenings became more physical. Not rough interactions, but lots of touching, stroking, and kissing. One night it seemed to me that Mickey was acting like she enjoyed being in bed with me. She raised her beautiful eyes to me once and asked, "Shall we leave?" "Sure." We came home and got down to it. Soon, we decided it was time to rent an apartment. Since Christmas was approaching, we decided to wait until New Year's Eve. But first, she wanted me to meet her parents. She told them she was dating a great guy, at least that's what she said, and they wanted him to come to their house. This might be the beginning of me having a real family again. I was a little nervous as we pulled up to the large but unassuming house. As soon as the door opened, Mickey D stepped in front of me and grabbed the arm of a man in gray slacks and a red Christmas sweater. She made a quarter turn to the right and said, "Daddy, I want you to meet the man I love, Joe Tyndall. Joe, meet my father. This is where I interrupted her by saying, Mr. Donan, oops, Tim, I didn't know she was your daughter. I don't even know what to say. Say, good to see you, Tim, and come on inside. Why didn't you tell me Tim was your father? Don't you think that would have been interesting to me? Yes, Joe, and that's exactly why we didn't want you to know about it. I wanted to know if you were interested in me or my inheritance. And we also didn't want the employees to say you were having a relationship with the boss's daughter and the company's sole heiress. Like me, she had a younger brother, but he died when he was only 16. So what does it mean for me to be invited to Christmas dinner with your mother and father? Is it personal, business, and does it affect our relationship? Joe, it means I love you and want you to meet my family. Business is separate. Since you told me you don't have a family, I'm asking you to spend Christmas with my family. Okay, now I know about Mickey DD is Donan. I really don't understand anything, don't you? She giggled, saying, Maybe you should put Deed in your name so it's duh. At that moment, all four of us laughed. After the air cleared, we all had a wonderful afternoon and evening. I really enjoyed chatting with Tim and Mickey's mom, Barbara. I may be out of touch, but I was under the impression that my request for Mickey's hand in marriage would be accepted by her parents. I'm pretty sure Mickey will say yes, but given what happened to me, I don't like to take things on faith. My instincts proved correct. Mickey jumped up from the couch and rushed over to me as I dropped to one knee with the blue velvet box in my hands. She screamed, Yes, 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 yes. 3 months later, we had a small wedding with no one from my half of the church except John and Sindra and a few new friends I'd made. After a honeymoon in the Caribbean, we returned to my apartment and began our life together. The first thing Mickey had to do was get off the birth control pill. We decided it would be a while before my boys would meet her egg, so let it be okay. We went to the county courthouse to get a name change. Mickey D. Reynolds reverted back to her maiden name of Mickey Donan. Given society's more lenient attitude toward gender identity, marital status, and personal names, I changed my name to Joseph Timothy Donan. When we asked his permission, Tim was honored and delighted that I had taken the last name Donan. With tears in his eyes, he whispered, Thank you, son. My friend John found a file of Carol having fun with Eric, and he had the urge to get back at both him and me for cuckolding him. A week later, Carol was walking down the hallway between classes when she heard someone's harsh barking. It struck her as odd. Turning at the sound, she saw a small group of high school students grinning after her. When she turned around, she was startled by a bark, bark, bark coming from another group of boys. Remembering that the school's mascot was a bulldog, she figured that Friday night would be the start of preparations for the game. As soon as she entered the office, the barking stopped. For the next 2 hours, she did not hear the barking again, but as soon as she left the office, it resumed. There was barking from one end of the hallway to the other, as if she had just entered a dog box at feeding time. There was the occasional howl, but mostly the bark, bark, bark that came from everywhere. None of the other staff members experienced a similar phenomenon. The next morning, as soon as she stepped into the concrete parking lot, the sound was like the starting line of the Iditarod dog sled race in Alaska. All mouths were pointed at her, as if she had turned the surround sound from 50 speakers on full blast. She hurried into the building, looking ahead at the concrete, not at the dog impersonators. She breathed a sigh of relief as the door slammed shut behind her. As she walked toward her office, a single male voice shouted, "Bark like a dog, bitch! Bark like a dog!" The deep voice sounded like Eric's. But what was he doing here? Why was he saying that phrase? It was like a ton of bricks came crashing down on her head, and she realized what had happened. From the question, how did the video get on the net? She jumped to, oh shit. What am I supposed to do now? With my job, with my career, my dignity? It's all going to be ripped to shreds. She quickly ran into her office and slammed the door shut. Were her staff smirking? Did they know what had happened? Who saw the video? What am I supposed to do now? In the middle of the first school hour, as the hallways emptied, she sprinted out of her office. Over her shoulder, she yelled that she felt sick and was going home. She didn't lie to them. She really did feel bad. But she didn't go home. Instead, she raced down the street toward Tyndall's factory with a roar. Bursting into Eric's office, she bellowed, "Did you give out the video of us having fun? If you did, I'm going to kill you." Eric saw and felt her blazing with rage. He quickly stammered, "No, I have them all here. I'm the only one who has them." He patted the computer and brought up a file on the screen. "You stupid asshole! You've been hacked! They got into the network and I'm destroyed. Can this life get any worse?" Sobbing and moaning, she collapsed to the floor. Not knowing what to do, Eric ran to his father's office, and the two of them returned to the Howling Carol. The two great minds decided to carry her into the house, shut the door, and get back to work. Epilogue. 5 years later. Carol had to give up her position as principal because she had lost the respect of the staff, students, and school board. A job was found for her because she was an expert in her field. Her new role was to work in an unfinished basement office where she researched all the new state and national procedures and guidelines. She had little interaction with other staff members and little interaction with students. With greasy, unwashed hair, dressed in flannel pajamas and fuzzy slippers, she would arrive at the building at 6 a.m. Then she would leave an hour before classes ended. Because of her notoriety, she was forced to live like a social leper, traveling out of town to buy groceries. Sam was sent home quite often for fighting. It's hard to keep from fighting when his classmates call his mother Wonder Dog Lassie. At first, a few men showed interest in her and sent her dog cookies with a phone number attached in hopes of getting a response. After I left, Tidal MFG's financial situation became like a toilet bowl dive. The loss of customers to Donan MFG, increased costs for the CFO and COO, and poor management on Eric's part doomed the company's economic viability. To pay off the mortgage and other debts, Edward had to sell the 160-acre farm he inherited. The land was to be developed with mid-priced housing, taking advantage of the scenic, hilly terrain. A business broker found a buyer for the company, and Edward pulled the trigger that ruined the family business. Edward and Sally rented a small apartment that took up a significant portion of their Social Security. When Edward and Sally died, the only evidence of the Tyndall family's existence in town would be tombstones. Eric and Sam left town, starting a new career as a used car salesman and burger man. On July 1st, the company director called a meeting of all employees to meet the new president. Edward and Eric were invited not to attend. The new foreman, John Brown, caught the attention of the curious crowd and exclaimed, "Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to our new president, Mr. Joe Donan." The employees were happy to hear that they had been sold to a competitor rather than to a huge conglomerate that would sell off equipment and lay everyone off. The real surprise came when I walked out of the office. Most people recognized me, but not by that name. "Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be back in this building. Did you miss me?" This was met with a huge roar. Looks like Eric wasn't turning out to be as good a president as he thought he was. After assuring the assembled Donan MFG employees of the expected utilization and production growth of the former Tyndall MFG. Of course, the building and your paycheck will have Donan MFG on it. More applause. Thank you for the wonderful reception. I'm sure this will be a great change for all of us. And now let me introduce my family, my wife, Mickey D., and our son, Timothy Joseph Donan. Yes, DNA confirmed he is my son. The end. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.